let's go on and start. And we're actually hoping today to play a few different, couple different games. And with one of them, we have some variations of the game that we can play. The two games that we're going to be looking at are Cheat Your Own Adventure, which is written by somebody named Shane McLean with the Pompeii Crew design team. This is a game that it looks like it first came out in 2012, and it's a group of role players from the United Kingdom that came out with Cheat Your Own Adventure. And then the other game that we're going to dive into a little bit is The Extraordinary Adventures of Baron Munchausen, which is written by James Wallace. In some ways, both of these games have very short rule sets, although I was telling Michael that Baron Munchausen is very funny as a rule book because it is intentionally long-winded to kind of get you in the spirit of creating kind of long-winded stories. He has this kind of long-winded way about kind of explaining things. I'm going to actually, why don't we start with this? Why don't we just go around and everybody can quickly introduce themselves, and then I will turn to Cheat Your Own Adventure and go through what is sometimes called CATS, the concept, aim, tone, subject matter of the game. We'll also have a brief talk about safety, and then we'll dive into the playing of the games. I'll start off. My name is Robbie Borth. I use the pronouns he, him. I am a high school English teacher, and one of the things that I have kind of started up is this kind of series of gameplay sessions where we play games to try to have a good time, but also we might at the end of this give a little bit of thought and reflection to how the kind of games that we're playing might have elements, components, or maybe the games themselves would be kind of interesting to think about in educational settings, things that you might be able to do in the classroom or with students, or might afford certain kind of teaching opportunities. So, but yeah, so happy to be here and happy to play this game. And I think with the exception of Jonathan, I've played with everybody here, so I'm really looking forward to that. And Jonathan is a former colleague of mine, so I'm kind of happy to kind of see him again. I'm just gonna go around my screen now. Michael, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Michael Matthews. I am a theater and English teacher of high school. Teach mostly seniors.
Okay.
He, him are my pronouns.
Okay. And Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Desjardins, he, him pronouns. I'm Washington, D.C. resident. I'm looking out my window right now at an absolutely gorgeous view of all the places I cannot currently visit, but I'm looking forward to visiting again someday.
Okay. And Laura?
Yeah, hi, I'm Laura. My pronouns are she, her. I am a freshman, soon to be sophomore in college after this upcoming week. So yeah, I'm excited to be here, excited to play.
Okay, and Jonathan.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jonathan Gray. I'm a middle school science teacher, 6th, 7th, 8th grade science. And yeah, he, him pronouns. And yeah, I saw this opportunity from another former friend of mine, Lolly DeRozier, and she clued me into this. And I run a tabletop gaming club at Windermere, which is really Dungeons and Dragons at this point. But it's cool. And even during virtual learning, we're still playing with the kids through Roll20. So that's kind of fun. So I'm excited to try to expand my role-playing game, my RPG tabletop kind of repertoire. So this is cool.
The concept of Cheat Your Own Adventure is based on the old Choose Your Own Adventure books, where you have, you start the book off and it usually uses the second person pronoun. It says, you are doing this, and it will describe a scene, and you're supposed to imagine yourself as being, being a protagonist in some type of adventure story. After you read a short bit, it presents you with different choices. Like, if, maybe you come to the end of a hallway and there might be a chest setting there beside a door, and there, that maybe off to the right, the passage continues onward, and it'll say, okay, if you open the chest, go to page whatever. If you listen at the door, go to this page, right? And then, the narrative keeps on branching off. And so when we're playing the game, we are going to be kind of creating that kind of a story, okay? So and that kind of takes us to the aim of the game. I mean, this is like a narrative creation game, which is kind of set up to kind of emulate that kind of choose your own adventure story. It is called Cheat Your Own Adventure, however, because of course, if you've ever read these books, right, you sometimes you get into perilous situations, and you may turn a page and it says, lo and behold, you die, some horrible death, and of course, I guess you could just put the book aside and say, oh, I failed. But of course, everybody cheated, right? You would just kind of work your way back to the previous branching page, right? And you would just choose another option and you would go on. And so the game kind of allows you to kind of backtrack like that and kind of make your way to the end of the adventure by, as they say, cheating. The tone of the game is, as you probably could already tell, it's supposed to be, generally speaking, you would imagine it to be a lighthearted game. I do think that, you could introduce other topics to it that would make it perhaps more serious. But I think its more default mode is a kind of fun, often funny kind of adventure story narrative that you are creating. And then as I say, the subject, I think we'll at least our first round kind of play it with the kind of default mode of the subject being some type of heroic adventure story. But we can, kind of see how we're doing with time after that, and whether we wanted to take it for another spin and maybe take it to a different direction. Just explain very quickly the rules. So what's going to happen with Cheat Your Own Adventure is somebody's going to start the book. And what we could do, it even provides a sample opening for an adventure story. At some point, the person who has control of the narrative will stop, and they'll stop at a place where we could think of the narrative branching off depending on what the protagonist decides to do. And we will then go around the table, and each player is going to present an option for the protagonist along with a page number. The page number is whatever number you want, right? If you want to say, if you open the chest, you go to page 54, right? And then the next person will offer another option with another page number, okay? Then it goes back to the person who had control of the narrative, and they decide which option they are going to take up, okay? And then the dice get passed to that person, and they are going to roll 2 6-sided dice, okay? And we're starting with difficulty level 1. If the 2 dice come up with a number that is equal to, let me make sure I've got this. So if the 2 dice come up, let me get this here. The roll is equal to or higher than the lowest difficulty, then the choice was wise and the adventurer is safe to proceed. The rolling player becomes the new reader. Okay, so they then get control of the narrative, and they will carry on the story for another minute or two, and then take us to another branching section. And then we go around the table again with new options being offered. Now, if the roll is less than the lowest difficulty level, then the choice was less wise. The rolling player then narrates a death scene, okay, for the character. Again, I would just point out that I would say that we do have a veil up on kind of graphic violence, but let me just make sure. I'm some type of cartoonish quick end is fine. Like they step over a cliff or something else, and I don't think it necessarily even needs to be a kind of death, even, right? It's just would be something that would take the protagonist out of the adventure.
Right. I mean, I had in mind like gore, bloody
Right.
descriptions, stuff like that.
Yeah, and then the game ends when the number 12 is crossed off with a victory scene. If you fail on the roll at the 12 point, then you just cheat your way to an ending as you would on a normal failure. Okay. So because we're cheating, we are always going to win. Our protagonist, one way or another, is always going to lead, result in some type of successful conclusion to the story. Okay. So let me see, are there any questions, or should we take it away, see how this works for us? Has anybody played this before, I should ask?
I have played it once.
Okay. And when you played, did you kind of play it in the default kind of adventure mode, or did you take it a different direction?
I remember that it was not the default Dungeons and Dragons style adventure, but I don't remember what it was.
Okay. All right. Yeah, because I know that people have come up with all sorts of different kind of narrative ideas that you could try out with this game. I actually had thought of one which would be a cheat your own adventure where the protagonist becomes the PR person for the I guess the official title is the press secretary for a president who kind of bumbles along and makes all sorts of gaffes or mistakes or things like that, and so that the press secretary would always have to be making decisions as to like, oh, how do I handle this potential scandal and the different options that they would.
Seems a little unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I was thinking it seemed a little too real.
Michael, why'd you start crying during the game? It's just so close to real life.
The reader should always address the game in the second person. So it's like you walk down the tunnel, you defeat the goblin, so on and so forth. And it does say occasionally make reference to items or previous books. For example, if you chose the rope, turn to page 948. If you helped the dwarves in the castle of the huge beards, turn to a certain page. Like with these cheat your own adventure books, they often came in these long series, right? So that they would always have like, previous books that had been, that were in the series that you could make up on the fly and just kind of introduce some, name of some other book that may have been part of the series. So I was thinking we would just take it with the default to begin. And I will start with reading this, and then we will kind of go around and we'll see who gets control of the narrative. So it goes like this. Your quest begins for the treasure of the dungeons of Zalkir. With a sword in one hand and a burning brand in the other, you stride into the darkness. The slope continues down into the dank tunnels until it opens into a large room ringed with the leering statues of gargoyles, a sturdy door in each wall. The door ahead is marked with the sigil of the evil wizard Zalkir. There is a small wooden box in the center of the room. Okay, so let's go around. You have to give me some options and accompanying page numbers. So, Michael.
Do you speak the ritual greeting of the Hamakai Gargoyle people? If so, turn to page 97, footnote 6.
And the footnote, I like that. Okay. Okay. Stephen.
If you cast a light spell overhead, turn to page 73.
Okay. Lara.
Okay. If you notice a trap door beneath the box, turn to page 124.
Okay. And Jonathan.
You notice, looking at the gargoyle statues, one of the statues is turned in a different direction, while most of the statues face out. One is turned the other way, facing its back towards you. If you go to investigate it, turn to page 43.
Yeah, I think I'm intrigued by the ritual greeting that my protagonist would know such a thing. So I think I will go to the page with the footnote. I will say the ritual greeting and of the gargoyle and go to that page. So Michael, and with this one, we don't even really need to roll because it's a foregone conclusion. But Michael, you now have control of the narrative.
And just as a reminder, Jonathan, you said that the one gargoyle was facing away from us?
Yes.
Okay. As you give the ritual, page 97, footnote 6, as you give the ritual greeting of the Hamakai gargoyle people, the gargoyles themselves spring into life, all excepting Dallin, the one who's facing away from you. His arms are crossed, and he seems angry at the last time the two of you had met. The other gargoyles greet you and tell you how boring it is to sit here working in this dungeon because people have not come here in a very, very long time. Do you get information? Or I'm sorry. It's what do you do next?
Yeah. What do you do next?
What do you do next?
And that'll be Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
What, Robbie? Shouldn't you start first?
I don't know if we were sitting around a table.
Okay. Oh, starting from Michael.
Yeah, I think
okay.
it'll just.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Sorry. Could you just repeat the very end of what you said?
Basically all the gargoyles except for Dallin had turned to talk to you. Dallin's still angry at the last time the two of you had met. The Hamakai gargoyle tell you how boring it's been to be guarding the dungeons of Zalkir because people don't come here too often.
If you ask permission to open the box, go to page 423.
And then Lara.
If you approach, what's the turned away gargoyle's name? Dallin?
Dallin?
If you approach Dallin, turn to page 13.
If you shout so Dallin can hear and saying, "Good, I'm glad that gargoyle over there isn't paying any attention. I don't want the same thing to happen again like it did last time." Turn to page 72.
All right, and if you break out your flute, remembering that if you break out your flute, thinking about how boring it would be to be a gargoyle and kind of empathizing with their boredom, so you break out your flute and start playing an entertaining reel for them. Go to page 427.
Well, I remember how Dallin was in the Sorcerer's Bride, so I go to shout so Dallin can hear that I don't want the same thing to happen on page 72, And should I roll first on the off chance there's a 2?
Well, I think this is a given thing, because if you get the same number or higher, you go on. So it's going to be, I'm going to go on and we'll take it to the third. The next one we will have to roll though. So
All right.
All right. So this is Jonathan now, right?
Yes, and so you shouted, you don't want to have the same thing happen again. Is that what you said, Michael?
That was what you had basically said. You didn't want what happened last time to happen.
Okay. So when you shout that really loud, Dallin is going to turn around with an immense kind of just jowly frown on her face, and she'll say, this sort of boorish and cavalier behavior from you adventurers has no place in here. We were enjoying our peace and quiet. And she starts to walk towards you. Do you face her with...
No, hold on. Is this our branching?
That's our branching point. Yeah, she starts to kind of start slowly marching up towards you.
All right. All right. So I think I'm just going to continue to go in this order. So I'm the player next to you. So frowning Dallin is walking towards me. Do you quickly escape by deftly making your way to the trap door beneath the chest? If you make the deft escape in the trap door beneath the wooden chest, go to page 123.
If you wish to make amends and pay Dallin back the money that you owe them, turn to page 1206.
If you invoke the Gargoyle Code of Honor and challenge Dallin to a dance-off to settle your dispute, turn to page 27.
If you throw one of the gargoyles sitting next to you at Dallin, turn to page 333.
All right. So you steal your resolve. You turn and face Dallin, mimicking the same jowly frown that she is giving you. And you put one hand up and the other hand down and start moving your hips and invoke what was the phrasing? Invoke the gargoyle rights.
The Gargoyle Code of Honor.
The Gargoyle Code of Honor. And yell in gargoyle, dance off! And begin.
Okay, so we're going with the dance off. And who did the dance off? Was that?
That was Steven.
That was
Steven.
me.
Okay, so Steven, now we will have to roll the dice.
Okay, so should I roll?
Yes, you should roll.
That is a 9.
Okay, so that is a successful roll. So Steven, you now have the narrative.
Yes. The other gargoyles start chanting, "Dance off, dance off, dance off, dance off." The high priestess of the gargoyles opens the ritual chest and suspends the magic disco ball in midair. Another gargoyle, his attendant, straps the ritual wings, the enchanted dance wings, to your back so that you can compete on even terms. As the ritual disco fireflies are released from the jar, the two of you float in midair, engaging in aerial 3D dance combat. the two of you battle your way to an epic standoff. Finally, Dallon concedes very well. It is. I will accept a draw and grant you a 2-week extension on your debt. You accept or actually no. At this point, what do you do?
All right. So, Lara.
Okay. If you place Dallin atop your head as your victor's crown, turn to page 23.
Okay.
Let's see. So, if you appease the Dowland's pride by saying no, the credit goes to you, great Dowland. Your challenge was beautifully renditioned, and I think that you are the true winner from now until the end of these dance battles. Turn to page 46.
All right. If you turn down Dallon's offer, saying, "How dare you still keep me in your debt? I have bested you, and the debt needs to be canceled." Go to page 94.
If you raise a cup with all of the gargoyles for the magnanimous setting aside of the debt for the time, and pull out your flute and party with the gargoyles for a time, turn to page 806.
Let's see what partying gargoyles look like and go to page 806.
Okay, so Michael, you'll have to roll here.
Okay. I really kind of want this to come up at 2.
All right, so that is a successful roll. So we turn to page 806.
So, all the gargoyles cry out "Huzzah!" and from a hidden panel in the wall, they open up and they roll out several big barrels of mead. As you play your flute, the drinks flow late into the night until the point where you've sort of almost forgotten that you're here to go into the dungeon of Zalakir, and defeat the wizard. What do you do?
If you ask Dallon to join you on your quest, turn to page 123 and skip the first 2 paragraphs.
If you apologize and excuse yourself from the festivities and go down the trap door, turn to page 56.
If you notice that your gargoyle friends are in such an inebriated state, you try to steal the various trinkets of jewelry and other things attached to them before sneaking off to the dungeon. Turn to page 364.
If you approach the sigil of the evil wizard Zalkir that stood above that center door, recalling that you had seen this sigil before in the island of lost gargoyles, and you are able to vocalize the meaning of the sigil, go to page 523.
I think I want to see what a trip down the trapdoor looks like. So I'm apologize, excuse myself. Page 56.
Okay, so you make your way down the trap door, and you realize that it is actually it is quite a drop, and as you descend, the floor gives
Actually,
out.
excuse me, we forgot to roll.
Oh, yes, that's right. Thank you. All right, so this is a success.
Okay, so you make your way to the trap door and open up, and you see that there is no floor underneath, so it is actually a slide. So you go ahead and slide on down, and it is a kaleidoscope of light surrounding you as you descend. You see many visions of your previous escapades and friends and memories as you drop, and then suddenly everything is black, and then you land on the floor of a cold, dark dungeon. There is one window, one door, and another trap door in this room. What do you do?
If you go and peer, if you go and peer out the window that is apparently under the ground, turn to page 253.
If you scream out at the top of your lungs, Dallin, Dallin, I have made a mistake. Please come and help me out of this pit. Turn to page 321.
If you pick up the old little tin cup that's there from the previous person who lived there and start doing that prison thing of against the walls of the cage, so you can tell the guard you don't belong here, turn to page 3.
If you consult your Junior Beholder's Handbook for escape routes in the dungeon of Zalkir, turn to page 71.
Okay, I think we're going to take the cup and run it against the walls.
Okay. See what happens when you do that. Okay. So Michael, you roll the dice.
Yep, I rolled a 9.
Okay.
All right. Guard finally comes over and goes, "Right then, what are you making all the noise for?" You tell him that you're not even supposed to be here. He goes, "Huh." Kind of looks down at some scribblings on a sheet. Goes, "We're not supposed to have anybody in here for a week." And he goes and unlocks the door. What do you do?
If you club the guard over the head and take his keys, turn to page 51.
If you give him a smooch on the cheek, just so relieved that you have finally been freed, turn to page 420.
If you yell, "Ha ha, sucker," punch him in the gut and run off. Turn to page 562.
Okay, and if you put your arm over his shoulder and console him about the difficult life he must lead as a guard in this dungeon, turn to page 221.
I think we're going to make friends with this guard. Let's go to page 221, arm around his shoulder, console him.
Okay, let me roll, see what we get here. All right, I got a success. All right, so, and I can't remember, did you give the guard a name? Did he have a name yet?
Nope.
Okay, so the guard gives you a smile and also a look of surprise that you were offering this kind of consolation. And he says, "Oh, you have no idea how rough it is in these parts. I'm here serving Zalkir, but I hardly ever see the guy, and he just expects me to spend endless days kind of keeping watch on this room where occasionally foolhardy adventurers drop in on me. But thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me some consolation. Let's go back to my bedroom, and we can maybe sit down to enjoy a pleasant game of checkers." And so you walk off with him. He takes you to his room. It has a bed, a small table, 2 chairs, very Spartan living. And he does, though, have a very nice set of checkers that he pulls out, puts on the table, and invites you to sit down with him for a friendly game. What do you do?
If the game escalates into a fist fight because you both play checkers from different regions of the world, turn to page 823.
If you casually brush against his hand while making a move and the situation escalates into something more intimate than checkers, turn to page 146.
If you realize that the edges of the room are fuzzy and that this man has a kind of gleam to him, turn to page 327.
If before you begin your game, you make a wager with the guard, your 10 cup for information on the whereabouts of the wizard, turn to page 531.
All right, so I'm playing my odds here. I'm strategizing because I like the casual brush of the hand, but given where we are on the tracker, I fear that if I went for that may be a tragic misstep. So I'm actually playing my odds a little bit. I'm going to go with I like the wager too, so I'll go with the wager with of the tin cup. So Jonathan, you have the dice at this point.
All right, so I gotta wait. Oh no, where did it go? There it is. So to roll, I just hit roll selected. Right.
Yeah, you can just select the 2 and then re-roll selected.
Oh, there it is. Okay, I have to select the 2. Re-roll selected. Okay. Oh, all right. So it's
that was a success. Yes, you got a 9.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. So he takes a look at the tin cup and he glances back at a empty shelf behind him and he says, "I've never owned a piece of silverware of any kind." I says, "Sure, yes, yeah, let's play some checkers." And you play, and he's strategizing. He does a double jump, but then you do a double jump right back, and then you're the first one to get the king, and you bounce back, and he's just blown away. Every move and counter move is just like this dramatic interplay of intelligence and wit. But you eventually emerge victorious, and he looks super dejected as he was about to win this beautiful tin cup and now realizes it's out of his grasp. He starts to divulge the whereabouts of the wizard, kind of half-heartedly, very gloomily, and keeps eyeing the cup. What do you do?
Okay. If you offer a best 2 out of 3, go to page 427.
If you offer him the cup to go down and overthrow his ruler and take over the means of his own employment, turn to page 1974.
If you attempt to seduce the guard, turn to page 129.
If you ask him to join you on your quest to become a fellow adventurer, turn to page 372.
Lots of good choices here. I'll say you keep looking down at the cup and you look at the guard and you say, "You know what? You don't seem like you're very happy here." And the guard at this point, it's been a roller coaster of emotions, of excitement and playing checkers and all this stuff, and he's been kind of lonely. He says, "You know what? You're right." And he starts to get this raging kind of tear face going on. He says, "I'm sick of being always told what to do. I'm sick of having nothing in my room." And you look and there's literally, there's nothing there. He said, I'm sick of how I'm being treated. He says, you say, "Well, I tell you what, why don't you join me and we will confront your employer together." I'm sure he's breaking all sorts of like workers' liability or workman labor laws and all that kind of stuff. Let's get him together. And you chuck him the cup. He grabs it, and you and him start to march out of the room. As you begin to march out, you notice that there is, he starts to lead you down various tunnels this way and that. He triggers traps that otherwise might have.
No, wait a minute. So are you taking you're doing the offer the cup to overthrow the
sorry,
okay.
I got ahead of myself.
So that goes to Michael then, and Michael.
Oh, right.
This one, yeah. Oh, So that's a failed roll. So Michael, you have to this ends poorly in some way. So you have to narrate that, and then Jonathan, you'll have to choose another option here.
On my page, unfortunately, what you did not realize is that Zalkir had pulled the wolves deeply over the guard's eyes. He was happy in the cage had been built for him by this wizard who kept him on a barely livable subsistence wage. So when you go down in order to take over, it turns out that he's a snitch and brings you in front of a number of the other guards. As they pull their swords, things look dim. End of story.
Okay. So end of story there. So Jonathan, you take up a different option now. So the other options were a 2 out of 3 offer. One option was the seducing the guard, and Laura's, yours was to ask him to join you.
Yeah, although I'm rethinking that because that's awfully similar to Michael's.
Well, the turnout could be different.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go with choosing to invite with Lara. Was it to invite him or he's saying he wants to come with you?
It was inviting him, asking to join the cause.
Okay. Let's do that one then. Let's do that.
Okay. And with this one, we don't roll, so that anytime you have the second option, Laura gets the control of the narrative now, and we don't have to roll for this one.
Okay, yeah. So you invite him to join your cause, and he looks at you and says, "Yeah, this sounds like fun. So what do you adventurers do?" And then you maybe put out your hand and say, "Come with me, I'll show you the way." And then you guys leave his room and go onward and upwards to go face Zalkir. You enter the hallway and you hear footsteps coming down one end of the hallway. What do you do?
Do you find a spot to hide in an attempt to ambush the approaching folks? Turn to page 663.
Okay, so let's see. Do you approach the footsteps planning to throw the guard under the bus for the poor job he has done, hoping that will throw Zakir into such a rage that you will be able to make your escape? Turn to page 563.
If you take your helmet off and put it up to your mouth in order to make the sounds of a wounded moose loud enough to hopefully scare off the footsteps, turn to page 666.
If you disguise yourself using what you can find on a nearby lunch cart, turn to page 212.
I think I want to see what a disguise made from a lunch cart looks like.
All right. Let's roll to see if this great plan is successful. This is a 6. So
yeah, so that's a failure. So
yes.
yeah, you narrate the unfortunate effects of this.
Yeah. I mean, using condiments, sauces, luncheon meat, slices of bread, you quickly concoct a clown disguise. And padding your shoes with enormous turkeys, you waddle forward. The guard looks at you in astonishment. What on earth is this? I'm here for Zalkir's birthday party, you say in a high, squeaky voice. And the guard accompanying you says, "Oh, yeah, yes. We are throwing a surprise birthday party for Zalkir. Don't give it away." And the guard looks at you and says, well, that seems reasonable. And as you walk past, he says, wait, Zalkir's birthday was last month. He draws his sword and calls the other guards. As the group of them charge in, things look dim.
All right, so Laura, we have to take another option here.
Yes. All right, let's see if the sounds of a moose will scare off these oncoming soldiers.
All right, take off your helmet and you go with a better echo in the actual thing that happened in my cup. And the scream echoes down the hallways, and you hear one of the guards go, "Blimey, the moose got out again!" And then you hear them start to like turn tail and run as it kind of goes further away. Which point you look back to your companion, and what do you do?
All right. And this will just to point out that this will take us to the end, whatever results here will take us to the end of the narrative. So that may factor into the option that you're giving here.
Yeah. If you break into a run and burst into Zalkir's throne chamber, turn to page 109.
If you turn around and suddenly realize that the guard is no longer, and you are actually face to face with Zalkir, turn to page 257.
If you burst into Zalkir's room, only to find a dead wizard and a giant carnivorous moose, who looks very enticed by your call, turn to page 366.
If you turn to your guard companion, look him in the eye, and come to the realization that this new friendship is worth far more than any treasure that Zalkir could give you, turn to page 547.
I'm going to see what's happening with that moose and the dead wizard at page 366.
Okay. So this is Jonathan, and you need to roll the dice.
Right. Okay. To see if they're all right. I rolled physical dice. Sorry. I will roll. I have physical dice.
That's fine. You can tell us.
I rolled a 6.
Okay. So that is a failure. So you need to kind of narrate a little unfortunate end to our story.
Sure. So you and your friend, the guard, burst in. There's a ginormous carnivorous moose with large, sharp teeth, presumably the one the guards were so terrified of. the moose call echoing in the chambers, you deduce that it drew the moose to your location and got to Zarkir first. He turns, eyes glowing red, big grin on his face, and snaps his teeth. Things are looking dim.
Well, since the moose didn't work out, how about the friends we met along the way?
So that's my option. So the guard again seems surprised at your overture of friendship, and he says, "You know, it's been a long time since somebody has ever reached out to me in kindness. I can tell you that the treasure that Zalkir is holding here is nothing to speak of. It's just a big PR job that he's successfully pulled off. He really has hardly anything down here. Really, what he's trying to do is simply entice foolish adventurers into his clutches, and he kind of grabs their tin cups or their rusty swords as his so-called treasure. I know the secret way out of here, and I think I also feel that our friendship is worth far, far more than any kind of piddly material rewards that we could win down here." Saying that, the guard takes you by the hand to a side secret door. The door opens. There are stairs that spiral upwards. He takes you out of the dungeon, and in the distance, when you leave the dungeon, you see in the distance light glinting off the top of a mountain. That surely is the mountain of the White Wizard, which you have heard about before, and you know that with you and your new friend, that adventure awaits you. And so the two of you set off for the mountain. And that would be the end of our story, leading us to the next sequel for the Cheat Your Own Adventure.
What a wholesome end.
For some reason, yeah, the little like My Little Pony friendship story thing was kind of in my mind. All right, so yeah, that brings our first Cheat Your Own Adventure to an end. I think what we could do right now is why don't we maybe take a 5-minute bio break, and then when we come back, we can decide where we want to take this. I mean, we could do another quick round of Cheat Your Own Adventure and then go to Baron, or we could go immediately to the Baron and give that one a spin. Okay, but we'll come back in. I have 12:15, so come back at 12:20. Well, during our break, Lara was mentioning to me that she found Cheat Your Own Adventure somewhat challenging. That like on the spot, she was saying, trying to kind of come up with like interesting ideas, or then this happened to me a couple times where I had thought of like, oh, this might be a really good option to offer, but then somebody else who went before me had already kind of taken up that option, right? I mean, it does require kind of this kind of quick thinking on your feet. Michael, I was wondering if you would want to, like, just as a little like segue into Baron Munchausen, which also is a game which requires a lot of kind of like quick thinking on your feet. If I know that you have a lot of experience in drama with kind of trying to teach some improv skills, some kind of on the fly thinking skills. Like, are there any kind of general kind of pointers or initial thoughts that you give to students as they're kind of engaging?
I've also been doing improv for 24 years in front of audiences, so like on a weekly basis. One of the basic things, it's not about being quick. It's not about trying to think up the best thing or sort of as you go, you start to make you learn how to make stronger and stronger decisions, and the ability to take a little bit of time to figure it out. When I'm first working with high school actors, like we do Commedia dell'arte, which is an improvised show. I try to do it about every 4 years, and one time we just did a long form improv show, and I use it in my theater arts and acting 1 class. But a lot of the first bit is just getting them to just make the decisions, and if they put pressure on themselves, I'll sometimes side coach. I'll just give them a binary option. If they're really not quite sure, I'll go, okay, is it something that your character feels good about or bad about? Bad about. Okay. Is it damaging to them or is it damaging to someone else? And then you just kind of have like those decisions they can make. And eventually you get to the point where they kind of are making those decisions kind of below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
They're making some of those quick ones to get to that decision that for a lot of people, it just kind of comes from them they're looking for the right choice and there isn't a right choice. Strong choices is what you want to go for, but while you're learning, it's just making those choices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with going with especially when we're starting off, what seems like the kind of normal answer. Because what you find is scenes a lot of them end up being kind of alike, and you start to learn, what are some stronger choices I can make in these? But when people try to get clever, it tends to crash and burn. I mean, essentially, Cheat Your Own Party is kind of a less interesting version of the improv game Yes and, which is a really common one that you sort of start with teaching. And it's like, and I made a note when we started. In a Yes and game, what I tell them after the first one, you never get to the point of what it's supposed to be. If you're truly listening to each other and letting whatever happens happen, like we would never meet the wizard.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end, the wizard just got kind of immediately put in that area, so we'd have kind of an ending. But like the lesson of the Yes and is the places you go when you're not trying to force it someplace are often a whole lot more interesting and a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And it's also a game that's designed to it doesn't give them the time. Like they have to interrupt, then they can take as much time as they want. So one person will be saying, oh yeah, so we're going to the football stadium. We're like, there's a game going on. We can't wait to get here. Then the other one goes, yes, and before that person finishes the thought. And then they can kind of pause and figure out, and then they start talking. The other person interrupts. So it's this thing of like taking control, letting it go where it wants to go, and not feeling you have to force it in a direction, because you'll create something more interestingly because both people in a scene are open to wherever it ends up going.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that was helped with that was informing me when I was coming up with options is somebody would suggest something, you look at the direction that scene would go in, and you ask yourself, what's a different direction that scene would go in? And then you ask yourself, what action would I take that would get me to that scene? So one of the things, so like in that scene, I was thinking, well, how do you get past the guard? Well, you could throw on a disguise, and so I came up with well how would I come up with the disguise, and what's the funniest way I could come up with a disguise? Okay, well, there's something nearby. What's nearby? I'll say there's a lunch cart.
Yeah, and I like the twist where the disguise was initially working, and what failed was the explanation of the birthday party.
Right. And it's like when I came up with the lunch cart, I didn't have any idea of, well, I'll disguise myself as a clown. It's like, but it bought me a few seconds to think about, well, what will I say if they pick that, and like what kind of a disguise can I make out of lunch items?
Yeah.
And so that got me to clown, which got me to birthday party, which got me to, hey, it's not his birthday.
Right.
And I was trying to think about how this could be used in an like what would this look like if a bunch of teenagers or a bunch of middle schoolers were to do something like this, or what could we use it for? And just, I think this would be a really cool exercise in like a language arts kind of class to break them up into groups and have them play around, right? Have them play around, and then perhaps say, okay, well, now you got to write a story, kind of filling in the details, but the things that happened in our round have to happen in the story, but the details are all left up to you, and then go back and read those stories and see how they were the same or how they were different or something like that. I think that could be a fun sort of creative writing exercise for for a group of kids.
I would make one massive change, and this is one of the things I notice while going through, and this is one of the things I do when I'm doing improv. Probably two massive changes. Maybe one. The next person, like basically, if we're the circle, whoever would be the person to like come up with a thing after me would definitely be the person to go. It's not whose thing did you like best, because if it's whose thing did you like best, you have someone who's shyer or who's like maybe not as confident coming forward. They're going to end up being quiet and not adding much to it and feel like they were not a part of the game. If they're the one that gets to choose, so like if the person goes through, it also stops someone from running away with it. They can go, what do you do? It goes, then that person immediately goes, if you do blah, 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 turn to page blah. And then it skips over the person who's going to choose and everyone else does. The next person gets to be like, I'll take this one and then I'm going to like write out what happens and then let it kind of continue going.
Yeah, that was going to be my thing, is that like maybe you could have marker, some way to indicate how many times someone has been chosen, so that you can't, everybody kind of gets fair treatment. Because I could see that becoming certainly an issue with students in general. Yeah.
All right, let's go on, and I want to transition to Baron Munchausen then. So here's how this will go. Somebody will start off by turning to the noble on their right and asking them to tell a story on a particular theme. I did just put in a PDF which has some of the pages, which in one of the appendices, James Wallace, who designed the game, has just a kind of ready to go list of various story ideas. So, you are certainly free to invent your own, but if there's a story idea that appears there, and did everybody get that? Is that showing up where you have, tell us, Baron, the story of how you discovered the source of the Nile by accident. So the player next to you who gets challenged, they can either tell that story or they can decline. And if they decline, then that person then goes and just challenges the person to the next to them. Stories should not be super long. They should be about 5 minutes and told in the first person. So, and you would use the honorific of the person that you are addressing, right? So, if it's the regent or the marquis or the right honorable, you say, oh, tell me, right honorable Jonathan, the story of how this happened to you. So you would launch into a brief story in the first person, kind of telling us that account. The goal is to try to outdo the previous storyteller. Now you can interrupt a story, and you do that by, coming up with some objection or, requiring some type of elaboration to a point in the story. So if like the person told the story and there's some kind of, they say that they did something that seems really unusual, but they're kind of possibly just going to pass on. You say, no. Explain that more fully to us. Or, you can, think about different ways of kind of raising some requirement that the storyteller would offer some additional explanation. And what you do then is you push your coin to that person. Okay. If you run out of coins, by the way, you are no longer allowed to interrupt. To interrupt, you have to have a coin. The storyteller can accept the interruption and build it into the story, in which case they would also get your coin that you have pulled out. Or the storyteller can dismiss the interruption out of hand by pushing the challenger's coin back to them and then also pushing one of their coins to the challenger. Okay. And then the challenger can decide, okay, maybe I just keep the 2 coins now, right? They return my coin to me, and to dismiss the interruption, right, I would keep them. Or the challenger can like say, no, right, can push it further, in which case then they have to add an additional coin to the stake, and that gets pushed back to the storyteller. Okay, so it can escalate with each side adding a coin to it until one side admits that they are wrong and claims whatever is in the stake. Okay. Now it does have this rule. I don't know that this one's going to come into play, but it says direct insults to a player's truthfulness, parentage, or claim to noble rank may be answered by a challenge to a duel. So, and this would be a 2 out of 3 rock, paper, scissors bout if that kind of insulting challenge was made. And then the story finishes with a vow to its truthfulness, or somebody in the company may kind of propose a toast to the grand story that has been offered, and then the storyteller would challenge the person seated next to them to a new story. Okay, and then once everybody has told one of these stories, the player who told the first story initiates the voting and passes his entire purse or her entire purse to another player who has told the most extraordinary tale. You cannot vote for yourself, okay? And so purses are going to get kind of passed, right? The purse would be all of your coins get passed around, and right, those passed purses in the final stage of voting are what are called the bounties, okay? And those go out of circulation. The person with the largest bounty is declared the winner of the game. Okay. Yeah, and you know, initially when I was reading, I was like, okay, the purse and the bounty, like how does that all work? I think the idea is that after everybody's told their story, let's say I told the first story, and let's say I had 5 coins in my purse, and I said, oh, I think Stephen told the best story. So Stephen would get my 5 coins, but those coins are not added to his purse at that point. So that when Stephen votes, maybe he had 4 coins in his purse. Okay. So when he votes, those 4 coins would go to the person that he voted. But if he got my 5 coins, right, because I voted for him, he gets those for his bounty at the end. Is that clear?
Right. The coins that you get from the bounty don't go into your purse.
Correct. Those are just like, that's just the end round or the end of game voting that goes on. Okay. This would be the Right Honorable Jonathan. You say, tell me, Right Honorable Jonathan.
Okay. So tell me, Right Honorable Jonathan, why you claim to be the husband of Cleopatra.
Well, it all started back when I was given the chance to visit the Great Pyramids of Egypt. And keep in mind, this wasn't in the time of Cleopatra. This was about just like a few days ago. And I got to the Great Pyramids, and from the Great Pyramids, from the view of one of the tallest pyramids, I happened upon a glowing visage off in the distance in the desert, away from the city of Cairo, of course. I was, of course, by myself, and as I climbed down the pyramid and approached the gleaming visage in the desert, I stepped into a moat of quicksand, and I got this sudden sort of feeling of, have you ever felt if you're standing still and then someone just yanks you backwards, that kind of that sinking feeling in your stomach? I felt that pull, and the everything around me went dark, and there I was sitting on the lap of Cleopatra, and she was huge. She was ginormous, and I tried to yell out to try to figure out what was going on, and the only thing that escaped my voice was a meow. I tried again, and this time it was more of like a kind of noise. And when I reached my hands up in despair, I looked, and there were paws where my hands used to be. I had come back apparently in time as one of Cleopatra's pet cats. And of course, I panicked. I was scared. And so I had to, I got up and I ran around, and I heard them all saying, "Oh, look how cute. Oh, look, Jinx wants to play." They thought I guess that's what the cat's name was. I'm not entirely sure.
But right honorable, I think I must interrupt. How could this be? Because everybody knows that Cleopatra was actually quite allergic to cats.
Well,
so now, yeah, you have to decide. Like I've pushed a token over to you,
right.
So you can either like dismiss me as out of hand as being way off base with this, or you can accept that token, and you now have to. That would mean you would have to incorporate the allergy of Cleopatra into your story.
Right. Okay, no, I want to accept. I think that'd be fun. So I will accept the token and say, I see someone is as well versed in the history of Cleopatra as I am. Of course, she was allergic to cats. Do I have to admit that I was lying about being a cat, or how does that?
Well, not necessarily. I would never presume to call you a liar, but you do. I think you have to kind of have to accept that there was some allergy and have to kind of work your way around, right, the fact that she was allergic.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So at that very moment, when I started to get up, Cleopatra, of course, started sneezing uncontrollably, because you're absolutely right. She is very allergic to cats. And as I looked up, I saw there was a gentleman with a big scroll of papyrus. Of course, that's what they, wrote on. That's what, right? Doing a portrait of Cleopatra. And I was just there just for, for the looks, for the portrait itself, because everybody knows all the Egyptian rulers always had to have a cat in their lap. Cleopatra protested, but they said it would look really good, and so I guess they eventually relented, and she eventually relented and let the cat sit in the lap for a little bit. And so as I got up in my new plight, Cleopatra actually swung back and just smacked me out of her lap. I tumbled to the floor at the foot of Anubis, actually. You know who Anubis is.
If you will excuse me for a moment.
Sure.
It's my understanding that cats were sacred in ancient Egypt, and therefore the court of Cleopatra would have reacted with shock to such an obvious blasphemy.
This is so my choice is either I could like build this into the story, or
you can just dismiss the.
Yes, no way. Okay, I got it. All right. Yes, you're exactly right. It was very blasphemous, and Anubis and a court of other Egyptian god and goddess mages, of course, saw this and knew that Cleopatra would only react this way if indeed I was not actually a cat. They cast some spells. They saw they cast a spell to reveal my true form, and there I lay in the statuesque vision of a human specimen, transformed from his cat shape to his current form. She immediately fell in love, and the rest is history. Until, of course, I suggested that we go out to dinner at a different restaurant than she wanted to go to, and she banished me back to the present, and that's the end.
Well, this certainly clears up those kind of lost years of Cleopatra, right before the infamous liaison with Mark Antony. So that very amusing tale. Jonathan, the Right Honorable Jonathan, you can now challenge me.
Oh, okay. All right. So enough about me, of course. Regent Robbie, I heard that you once escaped from the island of cheese and its inhabitants, which no one has ever done before. Please tell us about it.
Yes, that is a story that has lots of twists and turns to it. I'm surprised you've heard of that story. I mean, I've done so many things, and that particular tale is kind of one of the lesser exploits that I have engaged in. But to tell you first how I came to the island of cheese, this was during a vacation in my youth when my family went off on a little sailing vacation in our sailboat. It was me, my brother, and my parents. We left from the Keys, went off into the Caribbean area. We're having a wonderful time, and I do remember one day waking up and off the port bow, really picking up the strong scent of what smelled like smoked Gouda. And I was baffled and befuddled by this, but I asked my father about the smell, and he says, "Oh, that's very interesting that you have kind of picked up on that scent. That there is a small uncharted island in this area that is referred to as the Island of Cheese. I've never been there before, but I smelled the smoked Gouda as well, and let us make our way there." So we proceeded on, and by midday, it lay in front of us like a giant wheel of cheese, like perfectly circular. And we made our way and moored off the coast of the Island of Cheese. And I remember asking my father if my brother and I could go off in our dinghy and check it out. And my father said, "Yes, but be sure you are home by dinner." So there it was. My brother and I took off the dinghy, rowed to shore, and we were there on the Island of Cheese. Now, of course, a lot of people up to this point had thought that the island was uninhabited, but we were kind of quickly realized that those stories were in error. That there were plenty of cheese lovers who had kind of found their way by the island, and they were typically residing in the center of the island. They had dug out a huge hole in the middle of this island of cheese, and were kind of delightedly partaking of it. And my brother was there with me, and he couldn't help himself, but he kind of joined in their cheese feast.
Excuse me, Regent Robbie. I just have a point of fact that we all know that when cheese is ripening in the sun, especially close towards the more tropical regions, that the cheese gets sweaty and sometimes, dare I say, moldy. What did the residents do or to combat that problem, or were you really not even there?
Well, no, you are exactly correct about the mold problem, and the residents had the most unusual way of dealing with this problem, because the mold would grow, and it was like grass, if you could imagine, right? This kind of cheese mold that would kind of grow up. But you may know the famous chef Louis Philippe. He actually was sometimes an inhabitant of the island of cheese, and if he of course knew about various types of cheese shaving devices, and it had crossed his mind, the mind of Chef Louis Philippe, to outfit a giant cheese shaver that would essentially be used like it was kind of like a lawnmower of sorts, but instead of mowing the lawn, it would just go along the top of the cheese and kind of shave off the upper level and take that mold off, exposing beneath it this kind of glorious, wonderful cheese. But
Now, pray tell me, Regent Robbie. I had heard that the cheese people do not, corrupt their cheese in such a way. They do not bring this other technology and just corrupt the cheese in this way. How can this be?
I'm going to dismiss this and say, well, most regal Lara, I see that you have fallen prey to some of those scurrilous tales of the island of cheese. There are plenty of those kinds of apocryphal stories that are floating around that clearly have no merit. I, as somebody who has great discernment, right, have learned to kind of ply my way between the false apocryphal stories and the true ones. This is some lesson that I have been trying to teach you for some time, and I'm a little disappointed that you have not yet picked up on my training. So if I may kind of bring my tale to a finish, what you also must know about the island of cheese is that if you do partake of the cheese, which I've heard is wonderful to taste, it does have an effect similar to the effect of the lotus eaters. You may be familiar with the story of Odysseus, who went by the island of the lotus eaters, was invited in, which is very much like the way that the cheese eaters on this island would kind of treat us, right? Kind of inviting us to sit down. But I saw from my brother when he took his first taste of cheese that he fell under its mesmerizing spell, and the cheese eaters were all kind of overjoyed to have another member of to join them in their endless cheese feast. But I had luckily read my Odyssey growing up, and I knew exactly what the problem was. So when I saw my brother falling under the spell, I acted like the brave Odysseus and picked him up forcibly, physically, carrying him to the dinghy, tied him up despite his protestations, and quickly made my exit from the island and brought my brother safely back to the boat, told my father what had happened, and we merrily sailed away, luckily avoiding the dangerous spell of the island of cheese. And that ends my tale.
Seems legit. Seems legit.
Oh, more than seems. It is legit, clearly. So now I am going to go to Arch Adjunct Stephen. Arch Adjunct. I've heard that after a mighty earthquake, you arranged for Rome to be rebuilt in a day. Tell me, how did that happen?
Well, and as you know, the state of California is located on a massive fault and is subject to frequent earthquakes. And so when the touring exhibit of Rome, I mean, not the entire city, just the Colosseum and major landmarks, was transported to San Francisco to celebrate the 2000th anniversary of the founding of the empire. Naturally, all of these artifacts were heavily insured, and as the owner of a large insurance company, it was my responsibility to pay any claims. And so when the earthquake struck, destroying these ancient monuments, I knew that I was facing financial ruin. This was a catastrophe. So my only option was to rebuild all of these monuments before anybody noticed. So I quickly put a sign on the door stating that the exhibit was closed to celebrate to commemorate the birthday of the Royal Emperor Norton, who, as you all know, was Emperor of the United States and made his residence in San Francisco. And so in honor of his birthday, I closed the exhibition so that everybody could spend the day with their families, as is traditional on the birthday of Emperor Norton. And I quickly trained an army of pigeons to drag the stones back into place. I fashioned harnesses out of spider silk, cotton candy, and twine. But the difficulty was, and this was completely unexpected, it turned out that the pigeons were unable to read my diagrams and were moving the stones to entirely the wrong place. This catastrophe could only be averted by recruiting mice who, as you know, are nearsighted but excellent readers, to mount the backs of the pigeons and guide them to move the stones to their proper places.
No, can I need to interrupt because Arch Adjunct, I'm trying to work out the physics of this. And the idea, now I was willing to go along with the idea of pigeons carrying the stones, but when you put also mice on the backs of the pigeons and that additional weight, that's where, for me, I have a hard time kind of wrapping my head around how the pigeons would not only be kind of lifting and moving these stones around, but on top of that, these mice, and I know that the San Francisco mice are not, not like normal mice, right? That they do have a certain heft to them. How do you explain that?
Well, I did not want to get into all of the technical details because I feared that I would bore my audience. But since you wish to understand, obviously, I fastened helium balloons to the backs of the mice before mounting them on the pigeons, thus achieving neutral buoyancy so that the mice neither added to the weight of the pigeons nor floated off of their backs. This is, of course, a very delicate operation because the sight of flying mice would distract would distract the pigeons because that would attract hawks, of course, and hawks are the natural enemies of. But I digress. Now, as I had the mice on the backs of the pigeons, directing them, the difficulty, of course, being that the mice were very nearsighted, and I did not have the time to reproduce copies of the diagrams for all of the mice, because as you understand, all of the copy shops in San Francisco were closed for Emperor Norton's birthday. And so in order for the mice to read the diagrams, I had to provide all of them with tiny binoculars. But fortunately, one of my dear friends in San Francisco, the Right Honorable Lady Honoria de Balzac de Goethe de Robichaud de Maximilian de Fantasia de Rothschild de Necrophilia de Marzipan, was an expert oculist and was able to fashion a large number of tiny lenses in a very short period of time. And coincidentally, a plague of dysentery had struck the mouse population, so I had a large number of empty toilet paper rolls, mouse-sized toilet paper rolls, which I was able to use as the frames for the binoculars, thereby overcoming that difficulty in a trice. And so,
wait, no, I have to interrupt for a moment, esteemed. I forgot your title. Where did it go? Art adjunct. I'm willing to believe the pigeons and the mice and the tiny binoculars and moving all the stuff to San Francisco. What I'm not willing to believe, good sir, is that mice use toilet paper. I've taken care of a few mice myself. I've never seen them use toilet paper. So the validity of this story is highly suspect to me at this point.
You are clearly unfamiliar with the San Francisco mice, who, of course, are unable to use toilet paper themselves, having no hands. But in San Francisco, it is the fashion for mice to have servants, to hire the local squirrels often hire themselves out as washroom attendants, and so they carefully wipe the mice's behinds after the mice use the lavatory. And as squirrels are noted environmentalists, they carefully save all of the used toilet paper rolls in recycling bins, which I was able to plunder in order to fashion my binoculars.
All right, fine, proceed.
Well, I have reached the conclusion of my tale. The pigeons, aided by the mice, aided by the squirrels, aided by the the San Francisco Employment Agency, a very fine governmental institution which matches squirrels in need of gainful employment with mice in need of gainful employees. I was able in a single day to restore all of the toppled stones of the Colosseum and other major landmarks, and I do regret that I did not notice that I accidentally the copies of the diagrams that I used were in fact mirror images, because I photocopied them upside down, and so you will notice if you visit the Colosseum today and you consult ancient texts that the entrance is now on the left where it was formerly on the right, and this explains what appears to be an error in the works of Plato.
Yeah, and the other thing that this explains is the abundant amount of pigeon feces that I frequently find on these monuments. I mean, I wasn't gonna raise this point, but since we were already into the scatological element with the mice and their wipings, I just thought that I would add that little additional detail.
Yeah, yes. The Italian government was very upset about the condition of the monuments when they were returned, but fortunately my insurance policy had an explicit rider excluding cleaning from the list of possible damages. They were responsible for cleaning the monuments, and it turns out that they had absolutely no experience in cleaning pigeon droppings from marble monuments, which apparently Italian pigeons are a different breed. I had been completely unaware of that fact, but it appears to be so.
All right, quite a tale.
Yes. And I was wondering if the Marquis de Provence de Mikel would favor us with the story of how they alienated the affections of the Empress of Custard's pet manatee.
First of all, I would like to think of it not so much as alienating the affections of the pet manatee, but more rejecting the affections of the manatee himself with the Empress of Custard. Oh, Custy. Well, as you know, that I travel very often in the custard realm, which is not too far from the island of Cheese. There I had met, and to say we fell in love is giving it more than it probably should be given. To say that she fell in love is much more accurate. And to say that I was with her for a time is also true. The manatee never trusted me. The biggest problem was when the three of us would go walking together out on the boardwalk, the manatee would always look at me and then pull me aside and say, "I know you're not actually interested in her for who she is." And I would tell him, "Look, Custy and I are getting along really well right now, and there's no reason to mess that up, even though I'm going to be gone shortly. Why not have this fun month and then go our separate ways, better people for it?" And he threatened to hurt me if I ever hurt her. I told him, well, she's going to be heartbroken. Who wouldn't be? I'll be leaving her at some point. Women all over the world are heartbroken when I leave them. At which point, the manatee slapped me. Right there in front of everyone on the beach. That was embarrassing, but because that manatee was so important, Princess Custy, I let it go. At that moment, I told him that my honor will, at another point, be satisfied. So Custy and I talked about it. I talked with this manatee, and I tried very hard to gain this manatee's friendship again, to make him trust me. I went so far as to get a dual citizenship in the land of Custard, which is very difficult to do. I did all of this until finally I asked him to be best man at our wedding. I told him, "Manatee, you have been wrong about me this entire time. I have fallen in love with the Empress of Custard, and I will make her an honest woman, and you will see that I will not hurt her." And the day of the wedding, I went to him and I said, "Remember how I said that my honor would be avenged someday? The only reason I've gone this far and hurt her this much by leaving her at the altar is because you threatened me and slapped me in front of all of those people." At which point, I rode off on a seahorse that I've been starting to date.
I think there is one question I would like to ask.
Mm-hmm.
You are correct that gaining dual citizenship, that in and of itself is a difficult task.
I know it's correct because that's what I had done.
Oh, but on top of that, how did you get around the provision in the island of Custard that any marriages happening in the royal family must, I mean, this is written down in their law, those marriages must be only with native custodians, as they sometimes refer to them, right? That here you were somebody who was clearly from the outside, but how did you manage to pull that off?
Regent Robbie, I realize that you were born a regent and never in your life had to actually deal with all of the little red tape. You have people do that for you, but I, as the Marquis de Provence de Mikel, have had to deal with this in the past. Not only did I have forgers make it so that I was technically considered a lost child of the realm of Custard, I also went through into every single person in that realm. It's a very small empire. I made their acquaintance, told them my story, and their heart broke for me, and they looked so forward to me being the emperor at the empress's side, and there as the trophy husband that they believed that she should have had.
Well, I certainly that explains a lot. I certainly hope that they never discover the forgery that you have committed.
I hope they will not as well. Now, most regal Lady Lara, tell me about this taking possession of the moon that you once did.
Yes. You say it as if I am still not in possession of the moon. In fact, I have a summer home upon the moon that I have the pleasure of visiting every season, which is very pleasant indeed. So how did I manage to do such a feat? Well, you see.
If I may interrupt.
Oh, of course.
How is it possible for you to have a summer home on the moon when, as we all know, the moon has only 2 seasons, spring and fall?
Yes, of course. Of course, I mean the summer months here on Earth. I enjoy going up for spring and fall on the moon because the weather there is much more pleasant, and summertime down here, as you all know, it's not a good time to be around here. All of the visitors from Mars and the moon itself flock, and it's thoroughly unpleasant. So I make my way up there for the spring and fall time of the moon when I can. So yes. Let's see. Back to my story. Let's see. Yes, I remember. At one point, I had been tasked to expand my area of influence. See, my father was getting annoyed with me around the house. You know how it can be. Us ladies, we like to meddle in things that were deemed inappropriate for ladies at the time. So I said very well, and I contracted out to a banana who had been in my acquaintance for some time now, and had told me that I had confided in him many times, and the banana had been telling me things of these whisperings on the moon and how wonderful it is up there, and how free that most people were up there. And I was intrigued. So I asked him, how can I be the one to conquer the land on the moon? And he told me that he could put me in contact with someone. So he did that. And as it just so happened, they were able to get me this shrinkinator. So I shrunk the moon and took the moon hostage, and told the people of the world that if they did not give me the moon, I would not return it, and it would be forever in my pocket. So people conceded, and the moon is now my my permanent summer home.
I must ask, most regal Lady Lara.
Yes.
I have heard that our esteemed president has plans to send a mission to Mars, and part of this plan was requiring, as a kind of middle step, sending people back to the moon. Given that this was a key kind of linchpin of our esteemed president's plans, how is it that you managed to pull this off, despite the fact that I would have to imagine that it would have infuriated our esteemed president, and probably, in my mind, would have resulted in him taking some type of action.
Regent Robbie, I hate to interrupt your question, but I question your use of the word esteemed.
Oh, I apologize for my stumble with the language. So let's stay, instead of esteemed, we'll just say our current president.
Regent Robbie, you know that I have had contact with the president before, and he is aware of my position and my unique situation. So he actually approached me when he was plotting his trips to Mars, and we negotiated a deal. He may allow a certain number, an undisclosed number of people to come to the moon in the times when I am not there, but it has to be during those times, and I have to have full okay with who is living on my moon. But we came to an agreement. So if any of you would ever like to join me one summer at my summer home on the moon, you are more than welcome to.
Well, it sounds delightful. I mean, living in Central Florida, certainly having a place that I hear is a little bit more dry, would be a nice escape from the heat and humidity of Florida. Not to mention sidestepping some of the hurricanes that occasionally breeze their way through here.
Indeed, the skiing up there is fantastic.
All right. So with that, we are, I think, ready to bring it to the end game. And so we will go in the same order that. All
right. Could we go around and have everybody summarize their stories just to remind us?
Yeah, good idea.
Okay.
So Jonathan, just a kind of quick refresher of your story.
Right. My story was the tale of me traveling backwards in time as a cat in Cleopatra's lap, being swatted out of her lap. The gods and goddesses noticing that Cleopatra would never do that to such a holy animal, turning me back into a human and becoming Cleopatra's lover until we disagreed on where to eat.
Okay, and my story had to do with my travel to the island of cheese. How I noticed they dealt with the problem of mold growing there. I had failed to mention when I was going over that some of those refinements to the cheese shavers that we have seen coming about in the past few years have to do precisely with like this problem of mold on the island of cheese and the way that they have been refining their shavers to kind of take care of that top crust of mold. But the story had to do then with my quick thinking when my brother happened to taste the cheese and fall under its spell, and kind of physically removing him to my dinghy so that I could take him back safely to our our boat so that we could make our way onward in our vacation.
Yes, and my story dealt with my rebuilding Rome after Rome was destroyed by an earthquake while Rome was on a traveling exhibition in San Francisco, using my army of pigeons guided by nearsighted mice with binoculars.
Can I make a suggestion before I give mine? It's this does not handle moving tokens real well, particularly a whole bunch of them.
Right.
It might be easier just to like create a little label like I did, that just with the number of how much stuff you got, so we can just slide that to the person we want, as opposed to.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Because especially if we all try to do those things at once or something, I noticed they kept getting kept jumping and not quite working.
You're right.
Mine was about the Empress of Custard and how we had a torrid love affair, but her manatee was not a fan. When he smacked me in the face in front of a great many people, in order to get back at him for that public insult, very nearly married the Empress and then left her at the altar, telling him it was all his fault. And the reason that I hurt her as much as I did was because he had publicly slapped me.
Okay, and then my story was about how I created a summer home on the moon by shrinking it and holding the moon for ransom, and then the leaders of the world giving it to me. And I occasionally make deals with some of the world leaders, like our current president, and we'll sometimes let them use that for temporary missions, so long as I am not there to see their faces.
Okay. So, Right Honorable Jonathan, you start off the voting first, so you can take your bounty of 5, and who would you send that to?
Oh, that's a tough one. Let's see. I thoroughly enjoyed the ability of our art adjunct Professor Stephen and his ability to train mice and rats and get everything over in a day. I was impressed by that, so that's where my 5 are going.
I was not able to train rats. The rats, San Francisco rats, are thoroughly untrainable. I was only able to train the pigeons, the mice, and the squirrels. I did not actually train the squirrels. That was done by a government agency.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, it was still pretty impressive to rebuild Rome in a day.
Yeah, I actually was also inclined to give my my bounty to Arch Adjunct Stephen. I found his discussion of the hygienic relationship between the squirrels and the mice to be quite illuminating and surprising. So I will give my bounty to Arch Adjunct as well.
Well, I mean, I will give my bounty to Regent Robbie, whose modesty in completely failing to mention his lactose intolerance and the incredible discomfort it caused him during his sojourn on the island of cheese. I felt that modesty was incredibly noble and deserving of my bounty.
I thought taking the moon was a noble endeavor, and the taking hostage of it even more so. So I give mine to the most regal Lady Lara.
I was quite taken with the use of the time lapse with the Right Honorable Jonathan of Oviedo, with the turning into a cat as well. That was very, very impressive. A truly harrowing story.
Okay, and with that, it looks like the Right Honorable Jonathan ends up with the largest bounty. So if we were now, when you play this game according strictly to the letter of the rules, you're supposed to be sitting in the same room with drinks, and then the idea is that the person who has the largest bounty, it is incumbent upon them to purchase everybody another round of drinks, right? And then if you were going to play on from there, I believe the rule is that the Right Honorable Jonathan would be the first one to kind of lead things off again, and would be the first one to challenge another member of our esteemed company. And I am using the word esteemed there, I think, quite correctly with respect to our company, that he would kind of pass it on from there with a new challenge, and it would work its way around the table once again. Yeah, but that I think is a good little taste of Baron Munchausen, which I found personally a pretty amusing little game. Other reactions that you have to this game?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it takes a little bit of practice, because I felt like we should have been interrupting more, and there were things that I was coming up with that I wasn't quite quick enough to jump in with, like the lactose intolerance thing. I should have come up with that during your session, and more interruptions, and like the thing I did with the Coliseum being in San Francisco. I was actually. I came up with that during the first story. I was going to interrupt and say, well, but you say you were in Cairo, but at the time the pyramids were on a traveling exhibition, and they were, and I didn't interrupt fast enough, and I just let it pass, and then it was my turn. It's like, okay, I'll steal that bit for myself. But you need to be quick off the mark, I think.
I think part of that might be easier if it's in person. I think you'd be better able to like slide your coin forward and be like, there's this. But I think for what?
Yeah, I think I would think it'd be a much more visible and much more. You'd be able to really get into it and really like. Glower at the person that you're trying to say, but what about this? And then but yeah, I do like that it encourages interaction. But there's also something to be said about not interacting, as you can accumulate. If you don't risk it, then you'll at least be able to keep the coins. Mm-hmm. So there's that part of it, that if there was a way to incentivize interaction a little bit more, that you wouldn't have it be like, if you're really trying to like quote win the game, then yeah.
It's one of those games that winning the game is so against the spirit of the game.
Yeah,
like that's the thing that doesn't matter. It's like when people play certain social games for
like Cards Against Humanity or something like that.
Yeah, it's like who won? Why? Yeah, for me, I don't feel comfortable interrupting. If it was a group of improvisers or something, I would feel more comfortable interrupting. But there's a thing, especially when I've been with students and when I've been teaching new people with the improv stuff, it's very easy for me to jump in. So I feel like I don't. It's the same reason I wouldn't use this in a classroom, is because someone who's a little more gun shy will get interrupted by the person who doesn't care, and it's going to shut them down.
Yeah, and I think when you're interrupting, I mean, the idea with the interruption is, not to make it. It's not really about the winning. It's about like thinking about, oh, this would be kind of an interesting little twist for us to think about, right? To kind of like swerve the story or require the person to be kind of inventive in some way. In some ways, I think the game kind of does give the incentive to interrupt, because with me, I had a number, and you tend to kind of go low on you use up your purse, but then of course for the end game, that actually kind of is just fine, because in the end game, if you have a small purse, right, you're actually in the end game are not having much of a bounty to pass on, right? It's the people who've actually taken. I mean, there's a curious flipping that happens in the game. It's like, okay, if you've built up a big purse, you're not going to be able to keep it at the end of the game, right? Because when you vote, right, your purse is going to kind of go to somebody else.
Well, the game, if played like at a bar with drinks and stuff, incentivizes you to lose, so you're not buying the next round.
Yes.
you don't want to make sure you get that they don't come back to you.
Right.
I think that it would have been fun to play a little bit more with the challenging the challenge, where you can insult the
person.
Oh, I kind of totally forgot about that, and the duels and everything.
Yeah, I forgot about that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, like the duels, though, the problem with the duels is that and I don't know whether I like this rule of the game, but like with the duel challenge, where you insult somebody's, parentage or their right to the title, right, and you play the rock paper scissors, but that then eliminates somebody, right? And I don't know that I like the idea of eliminating a player, right?
Oh, so wait, if you lose, you're just out of the game, kind of a thing?
Yeah. So the other type of challenge, right? It says direct insults to a player's truthfulness, parentage, or claim to noble rank may be answered by a challenge to a duel, which is settled by the best of 3 rock paper scissors. The winner receives the loser's entire purse, and the loser must drop out of the game.
Oh, yeah, that's harsh.
That's harsh. Well,
yeah.
I think part of the fun of it is also like this idea that we all know that we're just kind of like bluffing each other and kind of boasting, but that veneer of right kind of respectability that you try to maintain.
That's what I was trying to do with Steven's stories. Like everything else was crazy, but the thing that was like drew the line was when they were wiping their
if you keep things strictly short. Because it felt like something like you originally said like 5 minutes or less where they're supposed to be. Some of ours I think went longer than that.
Yeah.
But if you keep it strictly short, it doesn't matter quite so much. It's just a little fun blip, and everyone else is taking 2-3 minutes or whatever. I mean, this is improv again. This is similar to monologues that we'll use to start off a long form, a little bit longer than those, a little bit closer to what you use for an Armando Diaz, or if you've seen UCB, what's called the Ass Cat, where someone comes up and gives a very short story about something that's happened to them, and then they use that to kind of bounce off of, and you kind of get like keeping it short and succinct. It's not long enough that if you get knocked out, it doesn't matter, because that's not the important part.
Yeah. There is and we're not going to have time to play it, but if you look at My Shorter Uncle the Baron, that's a game where somebody says, my uncle once, or my aunt once did this. And the game goes around, and everybody kind of has to move that account one better. Okay. So it's like, okay, my uncle once defeated a famous swordsman without when he was unarmed. Okay. And then the next person could say, oh yeah, well, my aunt once defeated, right. And it would be something kind of along the same lines, but it would be something that would be even more impressive, right? And then it kind of passes on that way. With these, the accounts are really just statements, okay? And then, right, people get eliminated from that game because like they can get challenged, and the group may decide, well, your story really wasn't any more spectacular than the previous story. And if that's the case, you can kind of vote them out. And so that one kind of moves along really quickly. But the idea of that one is a kind of elimination game, right? Is the idea to be the last person standing in this kind of like stepped up, more and more outrageous type of story competition that you get into.
Yeah, I also think, while it was interesting playing with people that I've never even, met before, but playing this with a group of like close knit friends, I think could also change the dynamic as well.
Oh yeah,
for sure, and make it maybe a little more, maybe less reserved in a sense when coming up with crazy stories. But I think this is cool as far as potential in classrooms and that kind of stuff. I definitely think the choose your own adventure thing could work pretty well. And this one, yeah, I could see it. But trying to incorporate into science, that's always the hardest thing for me, is trying to incorporate stuff like this into the science curriculum. But I just want to say thanks for reaching out and inviting me to this. This was a ton of fun, and I'm glad that you put this together, Robbie. That was neat.
Oh yeah, you're very welcome. I'm glad you could join us. I was, in terms of thinking about like narrative games applied to science. I mean, I do think about, things like, some type of evolutionary chain, like whether you could do a cheat your own adventure where you start with some more kind of primitive organism that kind of comes to a possible evolutionary branching that might take place. And like, if you develop into, right, you maybe kind of, take on some slightly different form, or you acquire some appendage or something like that, right? Go to this page and you could do a kind of like cheat your own adventure with some type
Spore?
of yeah, kind of like along the lines of Spore.
Yeah. Or like what they have in their decisions that they have to come up with, they have to use kind of the terminology or something that we've learned and inject that into the choices.
Yeah. And it might be fun then to like when somebody fails, like how, explaining how that evolutionary path ended up being a dead end and why.
Right. Like how did it make it more susceptible to predators? Or like,
yes.
Yeah. That's cool. I like that.
I use in acting and acting, theater arts, and creative writing. I use Story Wars and the Story Wars, a little bit of Tremulous, and the Smallville character creation. We use those there to help kind of create story. And then I've used Fiasco a little bit in. I use it mostly in my we're doing improv in the my acting class, because my improv troupe, that used to be our main form, was actually doing improv as a performance. So those are role-playing games I brought in and used in classes, but those are writing classes, acting classes, and those are used to like help create story.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of coming back to Stephen's point about like the interruptions. I think I think I would get better at that part of the game with a few replays. I think for me, part of that also would be the pacing of the storyteller becomes like, if the story goes too quickly, then I think I would be kind of too, one step behind and probably would miss out on more opportunities to interrupt. Whereas if somebody can take, you don't want to make the stories too long, but I think that for the interruption to come into play, the story that does have a slightly meandering quality and kind of get takes place at the pace that would allow me to kind of like jump in would be important.